Hi there, this is Alvin, and welcome to the Kickstart Commerce podcast, where we share search marketing and domain investing strategies to help grow your business. In today's episode, our guest is Tiffanee Neighbors, the founder and chief creative officer of Winnasium, a performance marketing agency and talent advisory firm that helps tech companies brand, sell, and win in the health space. In addition, Tiffanee is a motivational and public speaker, podcaster, author, and did I mention she's a domain investor and developer too? Today, Tiffanee and I discuss how she started her journey as an addiction intern and then an addiction supervising counselor, and how these roles led to her transition into the tech and healthcare industry as a sales professional. Tiffanee then shares how she honed communication and relationship building skills through a mentorship that opened the door to becoming a motivational and public speaker focused on branding, selling, and winning. We then pivot to discover how Tiffanee naively transitioned from domain enthusiast to domain developer of Shopology.com. We then discuss how Tiffanee discovered the expansive universe of domain investing via Clubhouse's creator economy while chatting about digital real estate. And last but not least, we chat about how Tiffanee secured her name and .co, why she gifts domains, and finally, her latest book entitled The Unicorn Dreamer. So with that, Tiffanee, welcome, and thank you for making time to join us today.
Thank you for having me, Alvin. I'm extremely excited to be here and actually get to connect with you almost live.
Yes, definitely. We've been playing a bit of cat mouse game. Little did I realize, looking back at our LinkedIn thread, almost like 2 years.
Yeah, it's been quite a while, but I think, via Clubhouse, it's kind of brought everything full circle, which I think is a pretty cool thing. And I really appreciate the opportunity, and I love your podcast. So I feel honored to be a part of this amazing content that you create. I think the first podcast that caught my attention from you was the one with Peter Askew. And I was kind of hooked after that.
Yeah, the Onion guy.
It's an amazing story.
Yeah, so what Tiffanee is referencing is the show about Peter Askew, which he is the owner and operator, or rather partner of Vidalia Onions, which who knew you can make six figures selling onions? This guy's doing it and doing it well at that.
Yes.
So So to kick things off, Tiffanee, so briefly share at a high level with our listeners just a bit about yourself, who you are, at a personal, professional background.
Yeah, so Tiffanee Neighbors, I am first and foremost a wife and a mother. Secondly, I am a ex-corporate executive, if you will, sales executive. I spent about 20 years in the technology space on the tech services side. So I led a lot of accounts for different tech services companies in the federal health space. And after about 20 years, I took a leap of faith, and I decided to take some of my crazy ideas and band them together and form a business. So I launched it safely, and I formed a consulting firm that really addressed some gaps in the market that I was serving. And those gaps were around 3 areas: branding, selling, and winning, or helping companies to do those things better. So I kind of created some niche offerings, and that's what I've spent probably the last 4 years, with some drops during COVID for sanity's sake. And this year, I've really just kind of doubled down on what I love the most, which is the branding and the digital side, which is really where my domaining gets to be put into play the most.
Interesting. The only thing I heard was 20 years.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but you don't look past 20.
You're so nice. Now I really like you.
I'm like, wait, hold on. She said she's a wife, a mom, and worked in corporate for 20 years. I'm like, so maybe I misheard her.
Yeah, 20 hard years.
20 hard years. Well, we can't tell it. We cannot tell it. I wish the listeners could see you. So that's interesting then. So corporate life, like, I guess let's even take a step back. Like growing up, I mean, did you envision yourself going into corporate?
I did. I think secretly I always admired entrepreneurs, right? I had a family full of entrepreneurs, people around me that were entrepreneurs. I had an uncle who owned a convenience store, what I called a candy store. I had a great uncle who owned a hotel and then a motel. My father had he had a little side chemical business where he made a lot of hair products. And I experienced a lot of entrepreneurship around me. And so I always envisioned going into corporate on a business side.
Mm.
But I was always torn because I'm a lifelong learner. I have a lot of interest. And it was hard to choose just one thing. And I think business allows you to tap into a lot of different areas because businesses support so many verticals. They support so many kinds of niche audiences, as if you will. And so, yeah, as a kid, I always knew I wanted to do something business or entrepreneurially.
Interesting. And then I guess that led to college or
Yeah. So college is a funny story. So I naturally naively I didn't know until high school that people didn't go to college. That's as crazy as that sounds, right? Like I didn't know that, and so I naturally thought I had to go to college. So I ended up I wanted to go into business, and I ended up graduating from high school my junior year. I made a decision that I wanted to graduate a year early, and I was set up curriculum wise to do so. So I graduated a year early, and I wanted to kind of take what we would call today a gap year
mm,
and get a trade so that I could use that trade to kind of build a business that would finance me through college. That didn't happen because my parents were like, you can graduate early, but you're not taking a year off. And so with that, I kind of reset, kind of my vision. I don't know why, of what I wanted to do. I pivoted from business and went into a helping profession, which was psychology. And that's where I got my degree. It's actually in psychology. And I got my MBA in business in 2012. But yeah, that was like almost so many years later.
and so how did you make that jump from college into the corporate world?
So I'll tell you, it's a couple of things. One is networking. I was very fortunate to have some folks that opened doors for me.
Mm.
And of course, I definitely applied and I worked a lot. I worked through high school. I had a babysitting business in middle school, and then I had just regular part time jobs throughout high school and throughout college. But when it was time to enter the working world after college, when you have a bachelor's in a behavioral science, it's very hard to enter or secure a decent job without another level, graduate level education. Of course, I wanted to get my doctorate and the graduate level education, but I also wanted to get some field experience. And so my mom happened to have a relationship with someone that ran a research program, and they needed addiction counselors, and they gave me a chance. So I started off in an internship role, and I moved up and to an addiction counseling role after about 6 months. And then eventually I got to be the supervising counselor, and then I went to grad school.
That is just unbelievable.
Yeah, it's different. But it was great
Unbelievable.
experience. It was actually experience. It was a research-based addiction counseling center that was funded by American University. And at that time, we had an epidemic with opioid use, but it was around heroin specifically. And so this was in 1994. So we had an epidemic with heroin usage, but it was really relegated to inner city populations.
Mm.
And so the research program was looking at how to improve the outcomes with specific treatment modalities. And this program had the highest success rate. Their program and the way that they chose to package their intervention or their model of, treatment ended up being the most successful in the country. And so I was able to learn a lot from them, but they even became rewarded for that by privatizing. And I was able to go with that new private organization. But today, fast forward decades, right? And that is a issue today, but it's more of a suburban issue. And it also is something that plays into the healthcare piece that I ended up being in for so long. I naturally gravitated to the healthcare market because it was what I understood when I made a transition into tech.
That's wild. From addiction into healthcare.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had no idea anything about addictions and how that stuff all worked, but I definitely understood the psychology and the people part of things. But more importantly, at that time, the core function of the role was around case management. So, as a new student coming out, being very structured, regimented, very academic in terms of how you approach things, it was the perfect job for someone like me. Like I just basically had to follow a treatment plan and document it. Yeah, and then host group sessions and make sure that people got the resourcing that they need and help to design what those resources look like.
That is awesome. That is awesome. And so then jumping into the healthcare arena, like I guess kind of walk us through there because you spent some time there as well.
Yes, I spent a lot of time. So I actually got into the healthcare space from a technology perspective in 1999. So I joined Oracle. I was an inside sales rep, and eventually I moved into the outside field. But I started off in an account that was very underdeveloped. It was in the military health area. And what happened is that at that time, the organization, we were moving from a technology perspective from just being a database industry or Oracle was leaving just being a core database and core technology company and moving more into what we called enterprise resource planning applications, if you will. So enterprise applications. And this one agency, I had all the DoD accounts, but this one particular part of the DoD account was focused on health. And they had this HR system, and they had multiple HR systems, one for each service, the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. And they were looking at consolidation. So the whole DoD was moving towards this consolidation, just like the story is the same as it is today, believe it or not. They've got all these disparate, separate organizations, and they want to just centralize and create a master system. And, that's the story. And so at that time, it was around the human resources system. I happen to understand that that part of the business. I understood how it worked in a healthcare system. And I was able to have a conversation with the people who were actually not just the technology folks, but the functional people. I understood how to have the conversations with them. I didn't understand technology yet because I was very new, so I could talk to the people side of the business. And that's what allowed me to really build some level of rapport. And it allowed me to open up the conversation for my company. And that eventually led us to mature that opportunity and close the deal. We got about a $19 million deal out of that after 18 months. The sales cycle was long, but that's what we did.
That's awesome. I can teach you many things in life. I can teach you tech, but oftentimes the soft skills, you either have it or you don't. Not to say that you can't necessarily learn certain things, but you can just see the difference in someone that has a gifting for relationship building and influencing. And so it seems like that gift is definitely alive and well within your tool set and ability.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny because when I started in sales, the gentleman who got me into sales was he had a profession, a career already at a company called Xerox, which we kind of know. Some people would know, some people know it well, others know it, as a dying brand. But basically at that time, they were like an industry standard for sales and for just everything that really was tackled around business excellence. And they were an industry leader. And he really encouraged me to break into sales. And I didn't understand sales as a profession. And it was never anything that was necessarily sold to me beyond the conversations that I had with him. But I did always have a tremendous amount of respect for his relationship skills, his communication skills, and then just to your point, the way that he treated people. And of course, he was very successful, but success for me is measured differently. And I look at success and how we manage the relationships around us. And so he actually had conversations with me multiple multiple times that we saw each other. And then one day I decided that it was probably time to listen a little closely, a little bit more closely, because he had moved from Xerox to Oracle. And he opened that door for me and several people. And I always looked at that as well, right? That kind of reaching back and mentoring and all of those things. And so, so I learned those skills and the value of that from him very early on in my career, and I nurtured it.
So then let me ask you this. So how do you go from addiction
Yeah.
to healthcare
Yeah.
to tech to being a motivational speaker into domain investing? Like, help me make sense of all of this.
I mean, you know what I want to say, but I'll keep it to business because I think it's higher and bigger than me, right? So I do think that, pivoting has been something that I think is an area that I've just I've been shown favor, right? And so I definitely think it is the networking and the door opening. I make no qualms about that. It's people granting you access, but I also think it's about performance. And I think that everywhere that I go, I try my best to create value and to do the best that I can. And I think that as long as you show a level of progression, as long as you take a genuine interest in people, the role that you're doing, and you try to live through a level of excellence, things become a little bit easier. And so every job that I've had came from someone that I knew. Every job that I've had in tech came from someone that I worked with prior to that role, with maybe one exception. And I think that one exception was when I went to Forrester Research for market research, and I was just really looking to get a bird's eye view of the market. So I kind of took a step back, and instead of kind of looking at opportunities that were presented, I looked for an opportunity that made sense for my career. I really wanted to look at the market as a whole, because at that time we were kind of moving into Web 2.0, and they were the bird's eye, the researchers, the market industry experts. And so I spent some time in that organization, and just to kind of get a pulse on where the market was going and what to do next.
That is awesome. And we actually have a bit of, I guess you'd say, shared history to a certain extent. It's almost like we've ventured down the same path. I spent roughly 20 years in corporate doing a number of software engineering development roles, from being an individual contributor all the way up to an actual manager, up to vice president of operations. And so that being said, it's interesting to hear you mention that you got most of your roles through relationship, because that's how it's been for me. I can't tell you the last time that I even put together a resume. It's been a matter of making other people successful. And in that, you never know who you're going to work with, whether you start at the bottom and you consider yourselves peons, if you will, but you never know who you're going to work with, and you never know where they're going to go.
Yeah.
But what is known is that if you make someone successful, they always remember that, and they'll remember you along the way, to where they look and go, I know exactly who can solve this challenge, this issue.
Yes.
Whether it's relational, whether it's product based, no matter what the situation is, people just remember that. And that's a bit of, I can see the similarities there, within our story. And so, well, tell me a little bit about the whole motivational speaker.
Oh my goodness. So that's totally taken me out of my comfort zone. So I'm an introvert, right? So how I survived sales for 20 years, I don't know, because it's just a crazy story. But I was telling someone just yesterday that I do believe that introverts like one-on-one conversations, right? And so I love that. And technology is such an intellectually stimulating and driven business. And so to have really strong conversations, a lot of times one-on-one, you definitely have group discussions and presentations, but for the most part, you're engaging in subject matter expert based conversations. And so it takes away it makes it easier for an introvert to survive, right? But the public speaking thing totally came about from podcasting. Who knew, right? So as a part of my pivot from corporate into owning my own business, I felt like branding was very important, because I felt that, and it wasn't just what I felt, it was what I had studied and read. I read that if you don't tell your story, someone else will, right? And so I wanted to create a business that really aligned to one, the pains and needs of the market, but also kind of led with what the business was about. And so there were a couple of ways that I thought I could do it. Was obviously to have a company with a brand name that was, representative, a brandable domain, if you will, that was representative of, the bigger vision, which is all about helping people win. So my company's name is Winnasium. So it's a combination of the word winning, which is what I love to do, study high performing and winning, and gymnasium, which in the Greek times was a place of learning for competitive sports and games. So I combined the two. And you see this in other places, mathnasium, other, it's been done before in some ways, maybe not with the same, or two different, or bringing two different things together, but that was my thing. But then also the podcast. So I decided to do a podcast as a way to help people that I would engage with learn from high performers. So I started a podcast that was all about high performing people in sports and business and sales, primarily. And when I did this, and it was really around the function of health, the health function, health industry. And when I did this, I started off by researching what it takes to win, right? And that led me to a lot of references, obviously, around sports. And so I started to say, okay, well, let me look at the top performing athletes and what makes them successful. And what I found is that behind every high performing, exceptionally high performing athlete, there was a performance or mindset coach. And that led me to the company that I ended up becoming a public speaker with. And that's Limitless Minds. And one of the co-founders is NFL quarterback Russell Wilson and his performance coach, his brother, and then a really amazing guy named DJ, who is also an ex-sales rep in the health space. So DJ and Harrison are also similar. And they launched this company in the same time that I did. And I had them on my podcast. And from there, we just kind of remained connected, and we talked, a lot about how we were both building our businesses in complementary but kind of similar areas of focus. And I invited them on my podcast. That was the initial outreach. I really wanted to get their company on the podcast because what they were doing was so critical to my brand. And they came on, and then they invited me on their podcast, and I was able to do that. And then they built out a whole team of public speakers and coaches to go into organizations that were focused on performance, and they invited me to be a part of that.
If that doesn't spell out relationship, I don't know what does. Like, you can't make that up. You just cannot make that up. And then not only that, I mean, it's like they were natural pivots, and it's just so interesting. It's like it gives me that the vision that I see of you is, as one assignment is coming to an end, you might not know your next one, but just as that ends, you pivot right into the next thing.
It feels that way. And so much so, it's funny you would hone in on pivots because, we talked a little bit before the show started about, just kind of different things. And one of those things is on Clubhouse. I actually have a club called Career Pivots, right? It's Career Pivots. And I did that because I thought on that platform, it's all about giving back, and it's all about, sharing things where you can help others. And the thing that when I started with Clubhouse, I really went in trying to help others get into tech. And what I found is that it was a struggle. And I was like, wow, I didn't know that this was so difficult for certain groups to break into technology. And I was like, pivoting is something that I think I figured out. So let me start a club helping people with their career pivots, right? And how to go around branding and positioning and connecting and networking. So that's what I did. And so when you mention pivots, that is something that I feel like, okay, if there's one thing that I have done enough times that I feel like I can help someone else, it's in that area.
Now that's interesting. Now, and speaking of pivoting, pivoting towards domains, Like,
Yeah.
when did so? I mean, do you really consider yourself, I guess, a part-time domain investor, full-fledged domain investor? Like, what do you consider yourself?
No. So I actually started off as what I would call an enthusiast, right? So really a domain enthusiast. I purchased my first domain in 2003 or 5, somewhere around there, and it was Shopology. And it was a domain that I got because I I was just starting to see and learn how the technology space, and I love shopping. And so I was like, how do I saw this, working for a database company. I was like, we need a database of boutiques. How do we find all these really cool boutiques? I was like, I want, and so I just kind of created a database of boutiques, but I needed a name for it. And so I was like, shopping analogy. Here we go again, right? Like combining two things. And so can't be simple. But so I was like, okay, so how do I get that domain name? I knew nothing about domain names, even though I was in the tech space. I don't even know how I figured it out because it's all a mystery now. We didn't Google things the way that we do today. It wasn't all available. I mean, it was out there, search was there, but it was different. So somehow or another, I figured out how to identify who owned the domain. And at that time, the guy, he probably robbed me. I think I overpaid for the domain, but I was working in tech and I was young and, it worked itself out. And so at that time, the who is was open. So I could actually identify who this person was. Again, I didn't know that you needed an agent usually to do this on your behalf. So I did it on my behalf. I tracked the guy down. I convinced him to let me buy it, and he named a price. And I didn't know that I probably should have negotiated. And I just got it. So I started off very naively. And I just wanted it. I got it. I just wanted to build my brand and my product and everything. And that's where I started. And then after that, I always had a lot of ideas, and a lot of my ideas manifested as business ideas, right? And so that really became just me obsessively buying domains. So I bought domains from that point forward. I would have an idea or see a niche of something that I liked and one day wanted to build out a newsletter or a business or a website. And I just kept buying and parking these domains. And it wasn't until honestly that I always knew that I learned, I studied it and I knew about the different ways of the different ways that the business was organized. And, the brandables was always my sweet spot. That's what I really am passionate about. And because I can also see how it played out even in the corporate world, and how we could use those names to differentiate. So I continued to build. And then when I was going out on my own, I started to say, well, what can I do with this portfolio? And I looked at the portfolio and it was kind of split into different categories. It was health stuff, the stuff that I had lived. It was kind of pop culture, like fashion-y stuff. And then it was more lifestyle stuff for moms. And so I realized, you know what? I should basically take these domains and do similar concept to what was already out there, build a marketplace for my brandables. So I just put a face, which you can see behind me on the wall, put a face through logos on several of my domains. And so I just thought, okay, now I need to get serious about this. What do I want to do? And so that kind of spawned me away from just being an enthusiast to being more of someone who wanted to be a domain developer. So although I developed one domain, I wanted to now say, okay, all of these domains have life. They were all, purchased with a vision. And so that's kind of where I've been led. And so that's what's next.
Now, did you know that there was an industry per se out there, like dnjournal.com, Rick Schwartz, Frank Schilling? Did you know that any of that existed?
I will tell you, I knew that there were conferences. I knew that there were people who bought and sold domains for a living. I did not know the extent I didn't know the history. So the folks that you just mentioned, I learned, believe it or not, I learned about most of them on Clubhouse. When I got on Clubhouse, there was a guy who posed a question that said, is digital real estate a thing? And I go, oh my God, he's thinking about the same thing I'm thinking about. And so I don't know. I didn't know how to connect with people because the app was new, but I was like, somehow or another, I connected with the guy, and he invited me on his stage. And the next thing I know, we started having these conversations. He pulls in Ryan Colby, and then the whole thing just opened up. And then I was like, you guys, they have this thing called Dot Club, and it was, that's when Dot Club was becoming like kind of popular. And then that spawned a whole nother, frenzy on the app. And so as that frenzy played out, all of these recognizable folks started to come about, right? I always listened to Domain Sherpa, that podcast. So I knew certain things, but it was just more casual. It wasn't what it is now. And so I felt like Clubhouse for me was divine, and it kind of allowed me to leap into this space. And oddly, I had already written a book on all of my quote unquote ideas. And I didn't realize the connection to domaining, believe it or not, even though I had domains in the glossary of the book, the terms. I did not make the connection until I met the domaining community to the extent that I did on Clubhouse.
You were in a somewhat of a vacuum
Mm-hmm.
just the whole time
Mm-hmm.
of you were doing your thing, you're buying domains, you're developing domains, but really there was just this whole universe, if you will, that was out there that you just didn't know about until as of late, probably within the last year, I imagine.
And I knew about NamesCon, and I kept saying, once I get out of industry, I'll go to NamesCon. And the first one I went to was the virtual one. So I just never, I always prioritize my industry conferences for the health tech world. I've gone to SaaStr. I've gone to so many industry conferences on the tech side, but never domaining. I've never taken, the courses that are out there. And so now I'm doing all those things. But I think it's all about timing. I don't know that I would have known what to do with it back then. It now completely makes sense for my business.
Wow. So then do you see like yourself as an investor or a developer? I know you said
A
developer
developer.
before.
Yeah, a developer. Yeah,
Gotcha.
so I invest to develop. So when I see the guy, so I'm not a flipper. I don't buy with the intention of selling. But if I buy something, and I do pick up things that I think have value, and I hold them because I think that I can sell them. But my goal, more often than not, 90% is to build what I have. And
Wow.
a lot of the names are connected to. So, for example, I have Shopology, but I also have Shop Boutiques, because Shopology is a directory of boutiques, and Shop Boutiques is another name, a domain that I own, and Eyelash Boutiques is kind of a replica of, so it's kind of like these different pockets. And so my goal is to build, and then I have a lot of health related domains, and so those are designed to be supportive in my consulting business on the other side of things.
So then how many domains do you own?
I don't have thousands, but I have hundreds. So I'm not
Yeah.
like the superstars there, because I'm not looking for volume. I am very, very concentrated on specific areas and specific visions.
Gotcha. Quality.
Mm-hmm.
Quality then
Mm-hmm.
is your key metric there.
Mm-hmm.
And so then so not hundred, or rather you said not thousands, and I say yet.
That's a
um
lot to manage.
well, I mean, I have roughly, I think I did 2,584 names.
Good gracious, what in the world?
Yeah,
When did you
2,500.
start?
So I started in 2000, the latter part of 2012.
Really?
Uh-huh. Yep. I was doing software development and had roughly about 125 names, and some of those were like defunct products, or they were marketing campaigns that companies didn't want anymore, and they're like, we're not doing that campaign anymore. You go figure it out. We don't care what you do with it. And lo and behold, I received a inquiry one day for a given domain, and it was $500. My total cost into it was $30. I was like, sold. And then for whatever the reason, like 30 days later, I went to look that domain up, and stumbled upon DN Journal and figured out that it had been sold for $5,000,
The
and
light
my
bulb went off.
jaw
Yeah.
dropped.
Yeah, I
I was
understand
like, OMG.
that.
And then from DN Journal, it was a whole new world. And I've not looked back. And so there's a part of our portfolio, my wife and I, that we're keeping for our 3 kids. So I don't care if you come to me and say, Alvin, I'll give you $1 million for it. It's not happening. It's
Yes.
going to transfer to them, and
Yes.
hopefully they do something with it.
Yes.
Then we have roughly, well, as of now, 18 sites developed. And I develop probably 2 to 3 sites a year. And most of those are hyper niche sites. And so, think in terms of, a lot of times they're probably going to only be about 100 to 200 visitors a day, but monetize based around Amazon affiliate or Google AdSense, or even strike up, peer-to-peer advertising. So, it just all depends. But I have my hands in many different things, as well as doing a daily expired domain auction listing. So when you say investor, developer, monetizer, like I fit kind of
Every
all of those
bucket.
things. So, but I
Yeah.
don't really spend too much time, doing auctions or any of that stuff anymore. But I also have a tool that does it for me. So that's kind of one of the reasons that I don't necessarily have to do that from a manual standpoint. It's all scripted. So it knows how to think like me, if you will, and go out and purchase domains. But enough about me and more about you.
No,
In
I
terms of
love
these
what you said,
domains,
because I do think that that's one of the beauties of the domaining business is all the tools that are out there to help, I don't want to say, like, in some ways they have a lot of artificial intelligence baked into some of this stuff to kind of help you
right?
do the searching and the broker, like all these things easier. And I think that makes things it makes it easier to run a very lean operation in this space, no matter what it is, right? And so, but I do believe I do admire people like you who have a range, right, across, because you can leave a lot on the table when you're not doing it that way. But and I definitely see a lot in the selling of the domains and the marketing of them. There is like a little bit of an itch there, but I have very limited capacity. So I have to do what I do in the way that I do. Peter Askew, one of your podcasts, believe it or not, was one that I was like, that's it. That's what I've been really trying to do with my domains. And when you interviewed him and you created the space, right, to share his business, his story it just hit home. And so that's where I kind of decided that's the lane. But I do enjoy the industry, the training piece a lot. I really love the schools and the tools. Like, those things really fascinate me from a perspective of our business domaining industry.
So Clubhouse, like, how did that change your perspective of the domain industry? And because obviously it changed many things for everyone, but
Yes.
yours personally, getting involved on Clubhouse and then coming to know the domain industry. I guess, have you participated in any of the auctions that have been
I
happening or any of
have.
that stuff?
Yeah, I did. I participated in a few. And I realized that, again, I like the development side of the house. So I definitely, that's for once, I kind of just like to do this one thing over here. But so I definitely participated and I learn a lot. What I love about Clubhouse is the variety, and the way that you can learn so much about the industry, the niches, and how people carve out their space, right? And their particular business areas of focus. And naming, the extensions. I knew a lot about the extensions just from reading before. So I definitely appreciate that. I love the collaboration. The tools were a big deal. So from a Clubhouse perspective, I really enjoyed learning and expanding my network and my understanding of the domain business. But what I really, really, really got out of Clubhouse the most from the domain community is its connection to the creator economy and the impact that it's going to have and can have going forward. Whereas before it was kind of a quiet, behind the scenes, in my opinion, market. For some reason, Clubhouse opened the gates in my mind, and it took a fairly quiet industry and it just did something different. And what it did, though, is it really, to me, is it empowered creators, which is where I see the dominant population on Clubhouse, which is, I think, just a platform for the creator economy. It really connected that whole piece, that whole asset grouping to them. It allowed them to think differently about how it all comes together. And, as we start to see all these other tentacles play out with the other things I won't elaborate on too much, but there's a lot of things that it's almost become more of a coming together and empowering thing for creators. And that gets me excited. And it's kind of something that I want to do more of in the future with that population.
Yeah, one thing that I've seen or experienced with Clubhouse from a industry standpoint has really been the diversity of just all the new players or folks that have been domain investing. Because like I didn't know, anything. Obviously, you probably didn't know I existed
Right.
outside of the show. I didn't know you existed, but here it is. You've been buying domains for quite some time. I've been buying domains, and all because of one simple platform. Here it is, a whole new slew of people
Yeah.
of all walks, lives, and creeds are now within the proximity of a phone. If you
Yeah.
have an iPhone or iOS device that you have voice access or internet access that gets you voice access, now you can literally have a conversation with Tiffanee. And prior to that, I'd probably say it would have been hard to probably have a conversation with you outside of if you weren't already connected on LinkedIn or connected through some other relationship, but it would have been near impossible. And so like what has that been like for you in terms of just the diversity and the various players and people and gender, sex, everything
Yeah.
uh, that
No,
it's
it's very interesting question, and it's funny that you kind of hone in on that, because it's something that I actually told my husband. I said, I found my tribe. I went on Clubhouse and I found my tribe. It's these people that do this thing that I've been doing. I didn't know they were out there in the masses, right? And then I think what Clubhouse and the opening of our community and the domaining space really did is, to me, it allowed me to close a gap, right? So I've been doing this since 2003. I think through all of the access to the experts and the connecting with these groups of people and building these new relationships, not only have I expanded and accelerated my network in the domaining space, but I feel like I've closed or accelerated knowledge about the business and the industry in a matter of what, 3 months? What is it, 4 months? I don't know. It hasn't been that long, right? Maybe it's 6 months. But the point is that I think that it's basically created lots of hubs. So I'm now a part of Women in Domaining that I never, ever was a part of. I didn't even know other female domainers out there. It was always a guy thing, right? And, quite frankly, there are now, lots of people that are culturally connected, right? So you have folks that are focused on, Black culture and Black domaining topics and things that in the marketing world, you kind of look at them as specific niches. So kind of those kind of things. So those people are coming together. And so I definitely think, you have your brandable community coming together, right? You have a lot of these folks that sell and that, that are the investors that want to come together and buy something and build something together. I've seen the environmental people come together. And so I think it's been incredible, but it's been so quick that it's almost dizzying, right? And so I think to your point, I think that it's opened up and accelerated networking within the industry. It's brought together almost, like these mini communities, right, of shared interest, communities of interest, if you will, within the community. But I think it's also created and exposed a lot of people that didn't know. I think there was, in the very beginning when the digital real estate conversation started, there were tons of people that wanted to take classes that just were not, they didn't know about it. And so I think it's really opened up some new exposure for a lot of folks that were in the creator space, and that were just even in the real estate space that now see the parallels to between digital real estate and traditional real estate.
Now, one of the things that is most interesting to me about this, and you somewhat mentioned it, and I kind of stumbled up on your profile there on Clubhouse. Everybody has domains, everything listed, descriptions, bios, all this one. And one of the things that I found most interesting, and I don't know if it was in your profile or I stumbled across it through LinkedIn, but it was the fact that you actually own your own name .co.
Yeah.
And I was like, how in the world did you wind up with that? And how long have you had it?
So I've always had my .com for my first and last name, but I was actually inspired by someone on Clubhouse. It was the very first time that I made the connection on Clubhouse to personal branding for domaining. So that was not a category of focus for me prior to Clubhouse. There was a gentleman on the app, and I think he was Sean.co maybe. And when I saw that, I go, that's interesting. And of course, I clicked on it. And instead of him having his name as a profile name, he literally used his alias. So he didn't have his first and last name. He just used Sean.co. And that was before all of the, frenzy started. And so I remember looking at that, and then that took me down a path. And so I may have purchased it then if I didn't have it prior, because I wasn't a .co person. And I don't mean that in like a little, only investing in one extension, but I was traditionally a .com, .ai, and .io person with an occasional, extensions around the .com, like buying those extras. But I was never a .co person until I saw it play out that way. And it made sense for my name because of Tiffanee and Company, the store. So Tiffanee.co was a nice play for me in my mind.
I know there probably has to be a story behind the spelling of your name.
Yeah.
Or is there?
So the name, my mom went to New York. And the story that she tells us, she went to New York for the first time, and she it was before I was born, and she went to the jewelry store, Tiffanee and Company, and she fell in love with it. And she says, if I ever have a daughter, I want to name her Tiffanee. How she changed the Y to two E's, I don't know to this day, but that's the story.
And you've been spelling your entire life
that way.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. And it probably, it is probably one of those things people, I guess, they email you, and either if they're not thinking, then it's that whole slip. Oh yeah, double E.
There's always the two E's, not a Y conversation, and then there's always the only one N. It's not two N's, because folks are like, well, if you got two F's and you got two E's, why not have two N's, right? Like, so that's the other piece there. But you know what? In hindsight, right? Like, if it was with a Y, I probably couldn't do Tiffanee.co because it would conflict trademark wise with Tiffanee and Company. But who the heck would confuse Tiffanee with two E's with Tiffanee and Company, right? So it's similar enough, right? Yeah.
But it's also the beauty and the uniqueness, though, that you get to actually own your name, because there are a lot of folks that, can't. Matter of fact, I was just gifted Alvin.gg.
Nice.
About a week and a half ago. So one of the listeners, longtime listener, or rather not a longtime listener, but he became a listener within the last year, and he's followed me, and he's like, man, your podcasts have helped me, and sent me an email and said, hey, I want to gift you Alvin.gg.
Yes.
And I'm like, great.
That's the beauty of Clubhouse, right? So I did that when we had .club, and when I put together a couple of rooms on the app. My guest, I gifted them domain names in their names, especially for those folks that aren't in the industry and maybe don't realize it. I encourage everyone around me to obviously buy their kids' names, right? But more importantly, on the app, I purchased a ton of domain names for other people and gave them away because I think that it's a nice gesture, but it also tells people a little bit about the significance, I think, of where the market's going. And it helps them, if they preserve it, to start to think differently about how they're creating their digital footprint and how they're designing their own personal brand online to drive their success. So a lot of the folks that I know that are entrepreneurs or that have their own podcast, those are the folks that I chose to purchase for and gift them their domains. But I learned that from Clubhouse.
One of the things, though, wrapping up here, one of the things that I really want to get into and really want to understand is a bit about this unicorn and what's up with this unicorn and dreaming. The Unicorn Dreamer, I think, is the book's name, right?
Yeah, so it was a strange thing, and I won't say strange. I now recognize, again, from the Clubhouse experience, that it wasn't as random as it felt in the moment. So in the moment, I literally had a dream. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and it was just this story that I had seen in my dream, and it played out. And my father always told me, because I had so many quote unquote ideas, to write them down. Sometimes I would write them down. Other times I would hope that I would remember, at some point and write it down. Well, in this instance, something in my spirit said, write these words down. So I literally woke up and started writing down the dream. And I went back to sleep, and then I woke up in the morning and a little bit more came to me. And the next thing I knew, I was like, this is a book. I'm supposed to be writing a book. And the whole next 3 to 4 months, I just doubled down and put this little short story together. And all of a sudden it started coming to me how to visualize it. So I figured out how to do some outreach and ended up with some folks in Romania and Ukraine and stuff. And they started to design the illustrations for me. And what happened is, it ended up being a book that really takes all of the domains and the ideas and how they kind of came to be a part of my world, and I put them in a book. And as I reflected and went through the writing process, I really felt like I was being called to help young people to learn about domaining, but also to give them permission to be dreamers. Because, working in a very structured community as a corporate setting, as an entrepreneur and an idea person, I often felt trapped. I felt like my ideas were trapped and they weren't what we allow creators to be today, which is kind of free with their ideas. And so I think that my book kind of is designed to show people an example of what happens when you dream or allow yourself to dream and what dreaming can look like. This character in the book dreams in this way. She dreams in domain names, right? But in, real life, you may dream in your own way, but whatever you do, dream. And so it then kind of walks through, just what that dreaming experience has been like, that journey of dreaming has been like.
So how long did it take you to do this book?
So it came to me, I think it was March or April, and I finished and published by September. So it was really short. It was like a summer. I remember the whole summer being consumed by it, and I actually published in September.
Wow. And where can people download or buy it at?
So it's everywhere. It's Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's on BookBaby. If you go to theunicorndreamer.com, the domain, go imagine that. That's where you can actually buy it, but it's on Amazon. I think that's the easiest place to get
it. And no more books?
I do want to write more variations of this one book because I do believe that I've been using it for public speaking. So I do public speaking with Limitless Minds, but then I also do my own public speaking related to the book. I go out to elementary schools, but more so high schools. And I've been doing things with universities, teaching teachers of literature how to tell this story to empower young authors. But for the most part, it's really about the creators and helping them. So a Spanish version, a faith-based version, are two versions that are coming out.
And no more animal books of any sort. No rhino books, no elephant books,
No mermaids,
no
nothing.
mermaids. Oh my gosh. She's like, no, no, no.
Done with the unicorns. But really, it's also designed to teach kids that a unicorn isn't an animal. It's a
Right.
billion-dollar corporation. A
There we
corporation
go.
with a valuation of $1 billion or more. So there's a glossary in the back. So it's designed to get the attention of young readers because there was a unicorn frenzy at the time, I think, that was really probably consumed in my mind as a mom. And really, for me, as a business thinking person, a unicorn is someone who dreams big and they dream about business ideas that can become something significant.
I've got the next animal for you. A narwhal.
Oh my goodness.
There we go.
No thanks.
Cousin to the unicorn. There we go. Narwhal. I expect
They're
a book
cute.
in the
They're
next
cute.
year.
Yeah, they're cute. I'll have you co-author it with me.
Oh, so that's how I get roped into this. There we go. There we
That's
go.
right.
You heard it here first. I throw out an idea and I get roped into it.
That's right. That's
I
right.
was
I'll write it. You-
voluntold. I was voluntold I will be writing a book now. Oh my gosh,
That's
about
right.
narwhal. Interesting. Interesting. So then wrapping up, what would your advice to someone starting their journey as an entrepreneur be? Well, like, where should they start?
I believe in blooming where you're planted, right? And I also believe in using your gifts. So I think that, if you have an opportunity, if you have a talent or a gift or anything, I think that that's where you begin because that's really probably where you're designed to bloom the best. And I also think that if you have a network, right, or a base of experience, give back, package it, figure out how to package it, and then use that information. That's what we're seeing in general in this whole creator economy is, the whole course creation thing. We're seeing that play out. We're seeing podcasting. We're seeing all kinds of knowledge experts take their information and package. And then I think you attract where that growth needs to happen. And that's, at a non-strategic level where I think I would give advice around that.
Well, last but not least, is there anything else that you'd like to share with listeners?
I actually would encourage everyone to buy their domain in their name, their children's name or whatever. But I definitely think that looking into domaining as something a little bit more strategically than maybe we have in the past decades because of the way that we are moving in the importance of creating a digital footprint or fingerprint or however you want to categorize it. I think it's important to really double down on those assets.
That is awesome. And so if someone has listened to this and they're like, man, I want to get in contact with Tiffanee because I want to know more about Winnasium. I want to know more about the Unicorn Dreamer book or the process in which you took. Like, how should they get in contact with you?
I think you mentioned it earlier, Tiffanee.co, Tiffanee.co. I think I kind of pulled together a lot of the contact information there, but I do also have, a presence on LinkedIn and Twitter. And on Twitter, it's TM Neighbors.
TM Neighbors.
Yes.
TM Neighbors. Maiden name?
Mason.
Okay, that's what I was like. M came from somewhere. I was about to say Tiffanee Michelle, but I was like, no, that's probably not it. But M, that's what it was, your maiden name.
Yep.
I do a little homework, just a little, not too much. Not too much.
Yes. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Tiffanee, again for joining us today and sharing your entrepreneurial journey.
I appreciate the opportunity greatly, Alvin, and I just appreciate all that you're doing and the space that you're creating. And I look forward to continuing to follow your amazing work and everything else that's to come here.
Yeah, well, definitely. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to Kickstart Commerce, where we share search marketing and domain name strategies to help grow your business. Please subscribe to this podcast via iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, or Podbean. Last but not least, please visit kickstartcommerce.com to subscribe to the newsletter sharing tips and tricks about the disciplines of digital strategy. Thanks, and that's all for now.